Hey Scott, how are you?
Good, Mike. Hello.
It's good to see you. And I know you're short on time, so let's just do one big story because the big story of the week is the lawsuit by a woman. She's identified as KGM, and in a lawsuit in Los Angeles, she won a victory against Meta and YouTube. YouTube was $3 million in damages. Is that correct? You're gonna have to correct me. Meta must pay 4.2 million in combined compensatory and punitive damages, and YouTube must pay 1.8 million. That comes after the beginning of the week. A jury in Arizona found against Meta. It was a case brought by DAs for 325 million. Now, the 325 million seems to eclipse the case in LA, but the case in LA used a very interesting technique. The attorneys for KGM, they didn't go after the content of any of these sites. They went after the fact that in both cases they claimed that the process itself, the platform itself, was designed in a pernicious way that led to this young lady's serious problems, including attempted suicide. Now, that's an interesting thing because that harkens back to the tobacco industry and the major case they lost, where it wasn't you cause cancer or anything like that. It was your product has been doctored in such a way to make it addictive, and
Right.
that's kind of what these guys did. Uh, and it's a very interesting case because they're basically saying the algorithm, the scrolling app, the various things that make things like Facebook so popular are precisely the things that were designed to be addictive, especially to young people.
Right. I covered these back-to-back days. And while people will look at the initial dollar figures and say, gosh, this isn't even a drop in the bucket for Meta, they are significant, and maybe even especially the second one. It was dealing with the question of whether these social media sites are addictive. And yes, we had the $3 million verdict, granted to the plaintiff, which is a lot of money for one person, but obviously not a lot of money for a multi-trillion-dollar company. But there could be others, and many, many others. And so this could be something that really forces these social media companies to make changes, or face this liability over and over again. And that's why, while talking to people about this, they constantly brought up the tobacco moment for social media. And it'll be interesting to see if that sticks.
Now, do you think these things will survive appeal?
Um,
I
Part
mean,
of
because
the
there's article, what is it, 230?
Right. Well, Section 230 does protect these companies from the content. However, like you yourself said, especially in the second suit, the lawsuit in Los Angeles dealing with whether or not these sites are addictive, that's a little different. Section 230 won't protect these sites from that. And that's why that may be the most difficult one for these sites and these big tech companies to overcome. And
Yeah.
this is what a lot of parents were citing as, aha, now we've got them. They have to admit that they've done some wrongdoing and they have to pay for that. And perhaps most importantly, they have to make changes. And that'll be interesting to see down the line whether or not these companies are forced to make changes to their algorithms, to their outreach, to the infinite scrolling. In other words, to the things that cause them to be called cigarettes and tobacco for the new generation.
Yeah. And what causes them to be so successful too?
Well, right. They prey on people, hanging around for a long period of time and getting, if not addicted to them, the stickiness of these sites.
Okay, well, let me play devil's advocate. I think you're probably right. I think we know that there's a number of suits waiting in the wings for the judgment on this. I think there's one in Oakland from a bunch of people, and elsewhere around the country. But let me take the devil's advocate just to point out that this young lady had other problems, and she had apparently has a dysfunctional family. She'd been a victim of abuse. She was bullied in school, and so the question is, did her being on YouTube, on wherever it was, so she was on Facebook or one of the other Meta companies, Instagram and that sort of thing. Did that lead her to be suicidal, or did all this other stuff contribute in a greater way? And perhaps she went to these sites as relief from this stuff, from this abuse. And so she's a yes, she was addicted to it, but was she addicted to it because of these external causes?
Right. And that not only was brought up in court earlier, but I think you're right. It does give Meta and some of these other companies a chance to rebut and appeal. And I think this will go on for a while. But again, some of these issues were brought up in court, that these young people had issues in their lives already. And so it's not 100% caused by these social media companies, but did they even exacerbate what was going on in their lives and make it worse with perhaps online bullying? Who knows? And this is such a new area in terms of psychology that I think what's really important about this case is that it's now out in the open. We're talking about it. It will be litigated even more. And we don't really know where it goes from here. But we know that these sites can be problematic. And knowing that, it's perhaps a good first step towards these companies being forced to change how they interact with people, especially young people.
Another question I have is the jury, the amount was very small comparatively. I mean, what message is the jury sending? I mean, the one to Google was incredibly small for a $1 trillion company, and even Meta, that amount, it seemed like they wanted to give this young lady a judgment in her favor, but they didn't want to make the statement that, yeah, this isn't hot coffee from McDonald's spilled in a lap that you get $100 million. This is something, yeah, you're right, but we don't think we want to set a precedent.
So it's interesting that you put it that way, because while $3-4 million is a lot to one person, it's a tiny amount to a company. But you say setting precedent. If this sets a precedent, we didn't have a whole lot of people spilling hot coffee in their lap, but we have a whole lot of families who have lined up with similar cases and similar stories against these social media companies. And I mean a lot. And that would eventually add up to real money. And do you want, if you're really out to make change in these companies, do you want one young woman getting $100 million, or do you want hundreds of families to eventually get paid and force these companies to make change? So I think precedent is actually what this case and those who are bringing the case against Meta and YouTube really are trying to achieve.
If I was the attorney for her, I would have made Exhibit A that Wall Street Journal investigative story. Did that come up, the one from a few years ago? Because that was so devastating. And I would think that'd be a very useful exhibit.
I mean, what came up a lot, and this was back to that time, and those stories were internal memos where the company would admit that they knew that these were causing problems. And that's really, I think, the smoking gun that ultimately did them in is, Mark Zuckerberg on the stand saying, hey, we've made adjustments. We don't want to harm kids. And then to look back at those emails that say, hey, this is really kind of messing with their minds, and have them say, yep, full speed ahead. And that is damning to these companies. So yeah, everything that you're talking about from the past came back to haunt these companies in this trial. And that's why I think it could last a while and could be damaging, is these companies may really have to step forward with some changes, or else they'll be held to this account that they knew what was going on and they stuck with it.
Um, couple questions. One of them was, I got interviewed on this by the BBC last night, and I had to confess that I do not trust Facebook, Meta. I never have. I've never been on it. I know a lot of people who work at Meta. I know a whole lot of people, relatives and everything else, who are on Facebook, but I have never trusted that company. And I said there's a disquiet around here regarding Meta because they always play close to the edge. They right to the edge of legality to morality and everything else. And you don't want to say you think that the cows are the cows are coming home, but this is if this seems to be a case, it might well be just that. It might be the one that starts everything.
Yeah, newsflash, millions of people who are on Facebook don't trust it either.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
it goes both ways. And this is a company that has done gigantic damage to its own reputation. It has clearly been its own worst enemy. And sometimes, hey, we're trying something out. It turns out to be bad for privacy. We pull it. Okay, that's part of it. They were experimenting in the early years, but now it's pretty clear that they know these things are damaging, perhaps even addicting, and yet they're still going forward because it helps them sell ads and keep people on the site. And what can you say? That's something that you should be wary of, whether a parent or a young person, and that's why there's so much mistrust around this company, and it's really their own fault.
Okay, do you think it spreads? I mean, Silicon Valley is not in the best odor these days, except on the stock market because of things that have just happened, mostly with social networks. Is the Valley sullied by this jury decision?
I think it's been sullied for a while. The tech backlash has been in full swing for a while, whether because of social media or AI or privacy or some combination of all of those, the billionaires of it all. And this doesn't help. But I think you touched on something. If you live here in the Valley, as we do, that there's this mistrust about these companies. And that's been around for a while. And so even though there are home teams and when they do well, our tax base does well, et cetera, they're not all that well trusted. They're not all that well respected. And I think they're facing a potential crisis of, do smart people in the near future, will they still line up to work for these companies? Or if I'm at the gym, and I'm wearing a Facebook hoodie, is someone going to say, oh, you work there? We're kind of getting close to that.
The black hats.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about Google just for a second. You think of WhatsApp and Instagram and Meta and all that, and then Google's thrown into the mix. And I don't know. I don't feel the same way about Google as I do about social networks. I mean, YouTube shows me videos. It has comments, but is it addictive? I mean, it's attractive. I mean, there are times when I just scroll through and look at the Google Shorts, or I hit, some popular podcasters, but it's not addictive, I don't think. And Google's reply statement afterwards kind of emphasized that we're not in that business. We're not those guys.
Right. YouTube does get lumped in with Instagram and with Snapchat, and certainly TikTok. Twitter to an extent, but that was their argument, was that we are not a social network. We are, a page where we help you create videos. There's a little bit of that, but I think that's also parsing the issue here. YouTube, you can infinitely scroll. YouTube will reward rage. There are many, a parent of young children who say that YouTube for kids leads too easily to the regular YouTube. And so their young children see inappropriate content. Yes, YouTube and Google may have a little bit of an out, but I think it's only a little bit of an out, to be honest.
Okay, well, I assume that Google will just announce they're buckling down, and you can't infinitely scroll, and they'll. I mean, there's talk of moving it from the age from 18 down to 16 or something like that.
We'll see.
to make a good show.
Well, and that's the thing. If these companies were smart, they'd step up and say, message heard,
Yeah.
we're
No,
making changes and here's what they are right away. And I don't think they'd have to be all that major right away to get some people a little more satisfied with them, but they do have to step up and make some changes.
yeah, and the fact that they haven't suggests that they need the kids. They need the kids' attention. That the adults just can't get hooked as much. And
Right.
that's so cynical. It's mind-boggling. Okay, I want to mention one more thing before we go. But Google just made an amazing announcement this week that it has come up with a new technology that will make chip memory more efficient by three times to six times. And that has obvious implications, not only to have implications on the stock market because all the memory companies went through the roof this week, but it has the potential of not putting as much drain on our electrical infrastructure. And so it looks like it's good news all the way around.
Yeah, you wonder if this is sort of the next iteration of Moore's Law in a way to make chips more efficient, faster, more
Yeah.
powerful. And this is the kind of thing that we keep hearing in Silicon Valley. Will these announcements get, blown away and sent to the back of the room because of all the bad news? We don't know. But again, this is the kind of innovation we've seen to improve speed, to lower cost, to make things smaller and lighter. And that's what we used to be known for here in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I think I told you once that I declared Moore's Law dead uh, years ago in the papers, on the news and all that. I no longer declare Moore's Law dead. It seems to be, well, never count it out. It always makes a comeback.
In one way or another, it seems to, yes.
Okay, well, that's it for this week. Thanks, Scott, and we can see you on NBC Bay Area and on Meta. And you can start seeing me again now on the BBC. So we'll see you next week. Bye bye.